After 9 years of what felt like an unending abyss of development hell, Dead Island 2 is finally out. And is it the sequel that I had always hoped it would be? Kind of. It's pretty good in a lot of areas, but I feel like it suffers too much from having too many ideas that don't get any proper exploration or expansion in the game further than what we got. Combat can be pretty satisfying, but it can also get pretty dull pretty quickly. While there's really cool ideas like these execution attacks they have, the animations get shared between weapons and each weapon only has 2 animations to begin with. Coupled with the fact that they can only occur when the zombie is facing directly towards you, not if they're facing away from you. Could have had a lot of cool ideas for some animations to do from behind, but we just don't get them. The game has a lot of really cool ways that you can interact with the environment in order to help you kill zombies, but at some point it kind of feels like it just boils down to throw a jerry can of water, gas, or acid and then use a weapon to set it off. The skill card deck is a really cool idea, but there are some skills that are just blatantly better than others that don't give you any reason not to use them. The flesh system is a really impressive piece of technology, however, that steps the gore up to another level. There's an immense level of detail here that leaves you creating gory, Basquiat-esque paintings of blood and guts that leave you with a sense of pride and wonder at how you even did that in the first place. You can see zombies' jaws flapping about in the wind as they try to attack you. You have bladed weapons that have the slashes accurately represented on the zombies' bodies. You have the guts beating and you have brain matter exposed. You can have their eyeballs pop out of their sockets and dangle around by the nerves. Skin can melt off, it gets burns, creating these hunking masses of charred meat. You can chip away at muscle till there's only bone left. It's legitimately an amazing system. Funnily enough though, there's a lot of times where the zombie game feels devoid of zombies. There are a lot of pretty wide open spaces that are just that, wide open spaces. Sometimes you can get into an area, kill 3 zombies, and then there's just nothing. Then this game will try and spawn a zombie right in front of you, which completely takes you out of the game, or maybe even spawn it behind you with no warning whatsoever. Dead Island 2 is a 6 out of 10. Its combat is fun and fast, but it can get repetitive just as fast. Skill card decks are a really cool idea, but after a while it just felt like I was playing the game wrong if I wasn't using the right cards. Add on to that the skill card deck just doesn't feel the same as a normal skill tree. The flesh system is a legitimately amazing piece of technology, and I can't wait to see where they go with that next. The lack of zombies in the zombie game is insanely weird, but it's still satisfying enough to where I could recommend you to go play it. However, the one thing that I am really not a fan of in this game is its story, mainly because I was a massive fan of the original lore of Dead Island 1 and Riptide. Dead Island 2, despite having a numerical tie to it, is actually a reboot of the franchise, which for me personally was super disappointing as I was really looking forward to more exploration of the original lore. Dead Island 2 is said to be a totally new story, with the original still canon to the lore, but this just becomes confusing. As well as this, even looking at it as a totally new fan, Dead Island 2's story leaves a little bit to be desired. Before I go on, it's important to understand a couple of key points of the original Dead Island lore. The gameplay of Dead Island might be silly and over the top, but the lore is actually quite deep and detailed. The 4 main key points are: 1. The Consortium, a secret global society that puts into motion a majority of the events that take place in Dead Island. They are a massive organization with agents in high places of power all over the world, such as the military, government, and politics, giving them a mass amount of resources that they can use to achieve their sick, twisted goals. 2. Geopharm, a once righteous organization dedicated to finding the cures for the deadliest diseases known to man, now finding ways to weaponize these viruses to sell to militaries for use in biochemical warfare under order of the Consortium. The Consortium took note of Geopharm once they found out they had multiple labs set up on the Benoi archipelago to study the Kuru virus within the local tribes. 3. Kuru and Pathogen HK. Kuru is a real-world prion disease akin to mad cow disease, occurring within the tribes of the Benoi archipelago due to the ritualistic cannibalism that they partake in. Kuru was a real-world virus that affected the people of the Foray tribe in Papua New Guinea, where Bunoi is located. Man, video game bases the disease on real-world thing? Last of Us. Last of Us clone. Geopharm studied Kuru within the local tribes, leading to the discovery of pathogen HK, a stronger variant of stage 2 Kuru, stage 2 HIV, and an amalgamation of other diseases that have mutated over time. Once an individual is infected, they quickly die, only leaving the most basic motor functions possible while making the host highly aggressive. As this spreads through blood and saliva, this can quickly infect thousands within minutes. 4. Kevin Caron Barrister, a mastermind hacker that has a vendetta against Geopharm and the consortium for what they've done to him. After the two essentially ruin his life, he swears vengeance on them and works his way up in the criminal underworld using his tech skills as a mastermind hacker. He operates under the name of Caron, hoping that the consortium will take notice of him and hire him without knowing who he really is. This somehow works, and once he starts working for the consortium, he plans to take them down from the inside out and then use pathogen HK to plunge the whole world into chaos. Dead Island released in 2011 and followed our 4 immune survivors, Jean May, Logan Carter, Perna Jackson, and Sam B, as they embark on an adventure to escape the zombie-infested island of Bunoi. During their adventure, they are guided by Ryder White, a colonel for the local military, to Geopharm labs deep within the jungle in hopes of making a cure for his wife, and then the world. After finding a tribal girl, Yarima, who can aid in the creation of a cure, they all travel to the island prison nearby with the cure in order to meet with White. Our immune run into Kevin Barrister, and he helps us out in the prison before White knocks the immune out in the elevator and steals the cure to try and escape without them. Kevin then helps the immune get to the roof to confront White, where he is bitten by his zombified wife and tries to use the cure on himself, only for it to go wrong and have White turn into a super zombie. As our immune, Kevin and Yarima escape, Kevin makes a weird remark that the world will never be the same again, before giving the evilest looking smirk of all time. From this remark, the evil grin, and the very convenient radio broadcast talking about a mastermind hacker named Caron that was located on the island prison, we can infer that Kevin might not have the best interests in mind. Soon after the release of the original Dead Island, a DLC was released, the Ryder White campaign, a short DLC that sought to give additional context to the original story. Playing as Ryder White, you explore the early hours of the outbreak and fight to save your wife from the virus. During this, it's revealed to the player who Kevin really is. Shocker, he's Caron, and that Ryder White never actually interacted with the immune heroes until the very end of the game, and that it was Kevin posing as him the whole time. Kevin uses the immune to satisfy the motives of his employers, as well as his own secret plans to plunge the world into chaos. The cure was made as a super strain of the virus at request of Kevin himself, who also learns that Yarima is the source of the virus, hence why he was so adamant on her coming to the prison as well, so he could try and escape with her to use her as a ticking time bomb to let loose on the world.
Trust me. She's the source of the plague. A walking time bomb.
Dead Island Riptide came out in 2013, and once more followed our original 4 survivors with the addition of a new immune survivor as they try to find a way off the infected island of Palanai, a sister island of Bunoi. During the adventure, our heroes learn that they're not totally immune, rather just coexisting with the virus. An interaction with deadly chemicals and weird mutagens could grossly mutate them into something far removed from humanity. The game ends on a cliffhanger where they do manage to escape on a boat, and it's left super ambiguous as to what happened to them following the events of the story. Dead Island's original story wasn't perfect, far from it. It was super jank and sometimes felt like the story took place out of order, but the lore implemented within the world and the general idea and story beats felt solid. As well as that, the dedication to ground the game's virus within an aspect of reality was an interesting take on the genre at the time and set the game apart from the others. Come to Dead Island 2, and not only is it being treated as a reboot, but it's keeping the original game's canon to the lore while seemingly retconning most aspects of that lore, as well as throwing out tons of new story threads to try and keep the options open, while neglecting to create a truly solid story foundation now with a compelling and interesting story that makes logical sense. It also suffers from some serious pacing issues near the end of the game, where it makes a mad dash to try and explain itself in the last 45 minutes and tie up all threads that just leaves it feeling rushed and clumsy. Dead Island 2 starts pretty strong, but once it starts introducing the major elements of the story, it begins to crack before ultimately falling apart at the end. The game begins with your player character surviving a plane crash, being bitten, and then soon after learning that they are immune to the zombie virus. You then come into contact with Dr. Ruben Reed over the radio, who urges you to get to the Sterling Hotel on Ocean Avenue so you can be evacuated by the CDC to help make a cure. Traveling in the sewers to get to Venice Beach, you meet with Lola Conrad, a mysterious woman who's trying to push you to let go of your humanity to become something truly great. She then just drops you into a pit of zombies and goes, yeah, good luck, fuck you. This allows your player character to tap into their zombie side and unleash their fury skill. And just when you think a new story element is about to be explored, this whole event and Lola Conrad aren't really talked about again until the very end of the game. There is, however, some really cool environmental storytelling in the graffiti after the sewers as to what Lola Conrad might be and what she wants you to be a part of. But again, this isn't really explored until you're almost done with the game. Once you enter the final stretch, the game remembers, oh shit, we did not tell you what a Newman is, despite the fact you've likely had the question of what a Newman is on your mind the entire game, considering it's on the fucking skill card screen right there from the start. Okay, so what are they then? Instead of focusing on pathogen HK, Dead Island 2 focuses on the new virus dubbed autophage, which is touted as the actual origin for the zombies. 25 years ago, yeah, even before the fucking first game takes place, Dr. Ruben Reed finds out that every human has a biological clock ticking down within them, that when it reaches 0, they will die and become a zombie. He calls this autophage, and autophage is destined to happen within every human unless they are one of the rare humans capable of becoming a Newman. Newmans are those who are somehow immune to the effects of autophage, never explained why. By the way, at least I don't think so, but I genuinely don't remember if that's ever explained, and because of this, do not become mindless zombies, rather part zombie, part fucking superhuman. Newmans possess great strength, speed, heightened eyesight, and even a hive mind consciousness. This is what Lola Conrad is, what her associates are, and what she's pushing you all game to become. Newmans are exceedingly rare, however, 1 in a million, so Dr. Reed orchestrates an outbreak within LA in hopes of finding the next batch of Newmans to potentially make a more viable cure. He orchestrates this outbreak using a modified strain of pathogen HK. It's in this journal entry, but like, this journal entry is only accessible to you 2 missions before the game's over. As well as that, it's located in an area that's at the beginning of the game, so you have no reason to come back and try and find it, and likely don't even remember that it's there to begin with. It kind of feels a little important to put in a journal entry, doesn't it? However, it's also revealed that Dr. Reed had tampered with his daughter Tisha as an embryo, injecting her with Newman blood, making her both immune to the virus, as well as the literal fucking cure for it as well. There's also a shady secret organization called the Eschaton Group that's only ever briefly seen in game and almost referred to once by a character, as well as a huge pulsating biomass in the sewer that we kind of only talk about once and then see again, and then it's not really mentioned again. There's actually a side mission after you complete the game where you learn a little bit more about the pulsating biomass and the earthquakes going on in LA. Fuck you for putting that in a side quest after the game's finished. Why would you not just put that in the game why? Why? You found out all this information about the outbreak, Newmans, and Tisha at the very end of the game, 5 minutes before it's over, via Dr. Reed giving you a dying monologue where he reveals all. But does none of this feel like it should have been explained a little bit before the game's right over and we've all checked out? So we have 4 main plot points for Dead Island 2. Newmans, autophage, Dr. Reed's Newman hunt, and Tisha being the cure. The problem is, the main story beat, the Newman hunt, makes almost no sense as to why it happens in the first place, and because of this, the other plot points feel a little bit clumsy. It's said in-game that the cure for autophage is Newman blood, plus Tisha's blood, plus biologically matched donor that you can filter all of this through as a human sacrifice so Tisha will start producing the cure within her own body. However, Dr. Reed has all 3 components for the cure before the game even starts. Why do we even bother with this overly complicated Newman hunt then if we already have the solution? What was the point of killing millions to save billions if the fucking solution is right there? It's likely Reed was trying to achieve something else with this whole outbreak, but that's not explained at all. Plus, you're telling me Dr. Reed managed to discover a biological ticking clock in our DNA that is going to doom humanity and then make a cure for that, but couldn't find out what makes people Newmans? The only solution was to plunge LA into an apocalyptic scenario for a 1 in a million chance thing of even happening? Then you have Lola Conrad, who believes Newmans are the next step of human evolution and that a society comprised solely of Newmans is how we will survive the new world. She's a really interesting character that only appears in the game for 10 fucking minutes in a game that averages 15 hours in length. She's very interesting, however, since it's implied she's been watching you, or at least known of you, since the plane crash at the beginning of the game, which is odd because this takes place before you get bitten. This must mean that she, as a Newman, must have some intuition as to who has the potential to become Newmans as well. So now we have 2 fucking points against orchestrating this whole outbreak, because now not only do we have the dickhead with the actual cure right there, but the heavy implication that existing Newmans can detect other potential Newmans before autophage even takes effect. Things just aren't adding up logically here, and it feels like this outbreak had no reason to occur at all. Maybe if someone else started the outbreak, I wouldn't be so off-put by it. Maybe the character who wanted to do exactly this that already existed in the original lore could have done it. It at least makes more sense than if the dickhead with the cure started it. The narrative here feels a little incoherent, and it doesn't help that the story takes a fucking nosedive 45 minutes before it's over as it struggles and stumbles over itself to try and explain it. Even then, it leaves so many story threads open on a cliffhanger ending as a piss poor excuse to buy the story-based DLCs coming out at the end of the year that were being advertised before launch. By the way guys, ending your game on a fucking cliffhanger after 9 years in development hell and then saying, hey guys, buy the $15 DLCs coming out in another year is one of the worst fucking ways to end your game ever. While I know it's meant to serve as a soft reboot, it feels more like a hard reset on the entire franchise, and barely utilizes the existing lore in a meaningful way to add depth to the story. More so, by making it a soft reboot instead of a hard reset, it only serves to bloat the story up more by reintroducing aspects of the original lore that we already have that could have easily been worked into this story. In a video detailing how Dead Island 2 is going to connect to Dead Island 1 and Riptide, the writers state that the original story, while compelling, was somewhat generic and didn't feel like it allowed them to take their story anywhere interesting. They wanted to create a totally new, unique world for the zombies to exist in while keeping the original lore there. Their solution to this generic story was to create and retell the exact same story, while ironically being less unique as well. The original Kuru virus explanation was super unique, and all the elements surrounding it felt logical within the game world that was set up. There were so many elements within Dead Island 2 that already existed in Riptide and Dead Island 1 that it only serves to make the story more confusing. The original lore has Pathogen HK, the Consortium, Geofarm, a third party that wants to use the virus for their own personal worldview, and the idea that those who are immune to the virus can teeter the edge between human and zombie and reap great benefits from it, such as increased strength and endurance at the cost of their own humanity. Dead Island 2 has Autophage, the Eschaton group, Dr. Reed, a third party that wants to use the virus for their own personal worldview, and the idea that those who are immune to the virus can teeter the edge between human and zombie and reap great benefits from it, such as increased strength and endurance at the cost of their own humanity. This would be fine if Dead Island 2 was a complete hard reset, but because both games coexist within the same universe, it's doubling up on a lot of elements that we already have while loosely trying to tie it all together in what feels like a massive cop-out on the writer's part. In an AMA that they did on Reddit specifically for story and lore, the writers state that the Consortium, Charon, and Geofarm were all fronts used by the Eschaton group in order to get stuff done, and that the Eschaton group was the real bad guy the whole time pulling the strings. This is stupid and illogical writing if the idea was to move away from generic plots within plots and schemes within schemes and conspiracy theories within conspiracy theory stories. The Eschaton group doesn't have a reason to exist because the Consortium can serve the exact same purpose. While we knew that the Consortium was testing bioweapons, you still had a lot of room to make them more morally nuanced like you wanted, because at the end of Riptide they were still pretty ambiguous. The Eschaton group exists solely to be a more morally nuanced version of the Consortium, and by adding it to the story, it's just bloating it up with unnecessary and now repetitive ideas. Also, introducing a new virus that's actually the origin of the zombies in conjunction with Pathogen HK just feels so unnecessary. Why bother creating a totally new virus with the purpose of making a more unique world for the zombies to exist in, when it's a vastly less interesting and less unique version of what we already have? Newmans are a cool idea, but this is already partially done in Riptide by Pathogen HK and the exposure to deadly chemicals and mutagens. It only needed a bit more exploration to be tied to Newmanhood. Again, it's just bloating up the story with ideas and themes that we already have in Dead Island that could have easily been used in place of these new ideas to give further expansion on the original story. It would have been better if the writers used the original lore in conjunction with the new ideas they wanted to present in a meaningful way that actually has impact on how the story plays out. The original lore from Dead Island 1 and Riptide isn't really used in a way that could add depth to the narrative being presented, and largely feels like a missed opportunity. Sam B, the only returning character, has some lines referencing the originals, but it doesn't really impact the story all too much, and as well as that, can actually be easily missed if you just never go into this one specific room ever. As well as that, it takes place with an NPC that, if you don't do their side mission, won't come to this house. Therefore, the only meaningful dialogue about the original Dead Island games has the potential to be missed. The only thing he really does that impacts the story is teach our player characters how to make modified weapons, but aside from that, largely doesn't feel like he has any other purpose than to be the "look, we brought him back, you remember this guy" character to entice old players in. His entire experience from the originals doesn't really have an impact here, but there were a lot of opportunities to use his lore in order to add depth to the player character's motivations, as well as Sam B himself. There could have been a moment where the player character pulls Sam B aside and goes, "Have you ever felt like you're turning into a zombie despite being immune?" And this would have led to Sam B opening up about what happened on Palanai with the deadly chemicals and the mutagens, and how it made him act and feel as if he was turning into a zombie despite being immune, and also the compromisation of his own immunity as well. This would have made his scene near the end of the game where he nearly turns more meaningful, rather than a throwaway line where he just goes, "Must be different shit this time." There was no point in the story that even hinted that there was a different zombie virus, up until this point. You also could have tied this in with the huge pulsating biomass in the sewer, because this was made with deadly chemicals. The player character could have seen this, remembered what Sam B said, and it would have made it a bit more tense to walk around in this than it already was. Sam B could have had a more guiding role in the story, which would have made his departure at the end of the game more meaningful for new players, as they would have had time to grow attached to him and grow to like him over the course of the game. Whereas what we have now is, he disappears for most of the game, only to come back at the very end for an emotional pull and a very sorry display. Do you see what I mean when I'm saying that the original lore of the games isn't used in a meaningful way to impact the story, which satisfies old players but also doesn't make new players feel left out? As an example, let's quickly take a look at God of War 2018. It serves as a soft reboot to the God of War series, but keeps the original lore canon. The difference here is that the original lore is actually used within this story to make an impact on our character Kratos. I had never played any other God of War game prior to this one, so I didn't know any of the previous lore. Around halfway through the game, Kratos' son Atreus falls ill, and he must travel through Helheim to get a part for a cure. Helheim is a frozen wasteland, however, and his ice-based weapon will serve him no help there, prompting him to go dig up his old past, the fire-imbued Blades of Chaos. This is a great moment for players who have played the original God of War games. It's a nod to the original lore while also respecting the games that came before, and has a big impact on Kratos' story and motivations. But this moment doesn't leave new players feeling like they're missing out, as it's appropriately talked about with the weight this has on Kratos. He verbally states that he swore to keep these weapons buried as a part of a past he does not want to return to. This is then followed up by a 3-minute long boat ride sequence that appropriately builds suspense and shows the player that this is a big moment, and still shows the impact this has on Kratos even if you don't know the lore of the originals. There really isn't a moment like this in Dead Island 2 at all. Sam B mentions that he's done all this before, but it doesn't really have any impact, as immediately following this, he basically doesn't do anything. Sam B mentions that when he was on Banoi, using the sewers was a good way to get around because it was easier to line zombies up. That's fine, but this doesn't feel like advice that's exclusive to Sam B, and feels like it could have just been said by another character. I don't know, maybe the guy who fucking lives in the sewer. I don't actually think it's ever mentioned in game that he once walked the tightrope between humanity and zombie, which would have been a great opportunity for the player to open up to Sam B and vice versa, and then get advice from Sam B that would be exclusive to him. Like I said before, he mentions the other survivors in some dialogue that can easily be missed, and even then, it still dances around the subject of what happened on the boat at the end of Riptide, a game that ended on a cliffhanger 10 fucking years ago, to which we still don't have a proper answer for. This is done intentionally, however, as in the AMA, the writers say that they purposefully don't talk about what happened at the ending of Riptide to keep you guys guessing. I'm sorry, Deep Silver and Dan Buster, I've been guessing for 9 fucking years at this point, and I just want a proper answer. And in that lies my main problems with Dead Island 2. It doesn't give you any answers for the litany of questions the game presents you with, and only respects the original lore by not including it at all. The narrative here feels messy and unfocused, and doesn't utilize the original lore in any meaningful way that could have added some serious depth to the story, rather than the loosely strung together story beats that we have now. By the end of the game, the Riptide cliffhanger is never explained. Geofarm, the Consortium, and Charon never mentioned. The game then also ends on a cliffhanger after a decade-long fucking wait that gives you little to no payoff for any of the events that the game presents you with. It's frustrating both as an old and new fan. One extremely common response I see in regard to anybody criticizing the story of this game is, yeah, well, you don't play Dead Island for the story, idiot. What if I do? What if somebody else does? God forbid somebody wanted to enjoy all of the $90 game they paid for instead of just 75% of it because no one plays it for the story. Once you apply that argument to other aspects of the game, it completely falls apart and doesn't make sense. Yeah, you know, I didn't really like the gameplay of Dead Island 2. I felt like it was a bit repetitive. You don't play fucking Dead Island for the gameplay, dickhead. Yeah, you know, I felt like the characters were a bit stiff, and I don't think they were well written enough. They kind of annoy. You don't play Dead Island for the characters, fuckwit. I know it's a zombie game and all that, but I feel like maybe the gore's a bit over the top. Maybe they could have just toned it down a little bit and focused their resources in other areas. No one plays Dead Island for the gore, ignoramus! You see how this argument doesn't really hold up anymore? Just because you like a game for its gameplay doesn't mean you can't sit back and think critically about it in other aspects. I think the gameplay can be fun, and that the gore system is really well designed, but liking these two aspects doesn't prevent me from sitting back and going, damn, that story kinda sucked, hey. I think it's ignorant to say no one plays this game for the story, because it's the main motivation behind everything our player character does and what we as players take away from the game. If the story doesn't hold up, it can only serve to leave players feeling confused by the end of it, and say the story is a 15-hour long setup for a DLC bait cliffhanger that doesn't give any real payoff for anything, that just serves to infuriate and anger players too. It's a demotivating experience, especially when the game dangles the idea of a really cool story event right in front of you and then ends the game right fucking then and there. The writers say that they didn't want to feel like original fans had pulled a fast one on them by enticing them in with the name of Dead Island 2 and then starting completely from scratch, but that's exactly what they did. They also say that they love to throw out a ton of story ideas for the community to ponder on, but I think they forget that at some point you actually have to give me an answer for the story thread that you present me with. Everything feels unfocused in relation to this narrative and the decisions made around it. Despite having real lore nerds on the team to make sure nothing contradicted from the original game, I don't even feel like they needed to be there considering how little of the lore is utilized in a meaningful way. It's disappointing that the sequel to one of my favorite games of all time doesn't give any further exploration on the original lore or utilize it in a meaningful way in the new story they want to present. Instead, they use the original story pretty sparingly, and because of this, miss out on perfect opportunities to delve deeper into the themes and ideas of the new game using the lore of the originals to strengthen it. Couple this with a doubling up on themes and ideas that we have, and it just totally overcomplicates the story. It chooses not to answer any questions from the original while presenting you with new questions that also barely get any answers. This culminates in an overly complicated narrative with plot holes that have the story fall apart way too easily, too many themes being presented with no real payoff for any of them, poor pacing issues as we approach the ending of the game, that of which hinges entirely on baiting you into buy the DLC that has the ending that should have been in the game at the very start. Dead Island 2 focuses so much on setting up the future that it forgets to solidify the current story it's trying to tell in the present, while forgetting the past that even allowed it to exist in the first place. I'm at Burger King with my burger queen. Can I please get a large fry? She's vegan, please, so don't put no cheese. And can I get a honey mustard on the side? Alright, that's good. Shit, that was good. That's good.